The door opened, and Elena stepped into my office, her posture tense, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked around the room as if searching for something familiar or reassuring. Finally, she sank into the chair across from me, her hands gripping the edges like she might fall off if she let go. "I thought getting married would solve everything," she began abruptly, her voice trembling with frustration. "Instead, it feels like I just trapped myself in a bigger mess." Her words hung in the air for a moment, raw and jagged. I waited, giving her the space to find her rhythm. "We got married 2 years ago. I was 21. My parents didn't want me to, they said I was too young, that Alex wasn't ready. But I didn't care. I was in love. At least, I thought I was." She uncrossed her arms and leaned forward, her fingers brushing against the tear-streaked edge of her sleeve. "I was so sure, you know. He was charming, funny, and so different from anyone I'd ever met. We met in college, and it was like he saw me in a way no one else ever did. I thought we'd get married, build a life together, grow into everything we dreamed of. But..." Her voice faltered. She looked away, her gaze fixing on the soft rustle of leaves outside the window. "Within months, it all started to fall apart. He didn't want to work. He'd sleep in until noon, play video games all day, and when I asked him to help with bills or even clean up, he'd laugh and say, 'We're just starting out, Elena. Stop stressing so much.'" Her hands clenched into fists. I thought maybe I was the problem. That I was expecting too much too soon. I kept telling myself it would get better, that he just needed time to adjust to being married. But time passed, and nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. I leaned in slightly, not interrupting, but signaling she had my full attention. "I remember this one night, we'd been married for 6 months. I came home from work. My job wasn't much, just waitressing at a diner, but it paid the rent. Alex was on the couch, controller in hand, surrounded by empty soda cans and snack wrappers. He didn't even look up when I walked in. And you know what? That hurt more than anything he could have said. Like I didn't matter." Her voice cracked, and she let out a bitter laugh. I started wondering, what if my parents were right? What if I'd been stupid to think we could make this work? But then I'd feel guilty, because I loved him. At least, I thought I did. Isn't love supposed to fix things? She looked at me then, her eyes wide and searching, as if I might have the answer she couldn't find. Why didn't anyone warn me about this? Why didn't I see it coming? I wanted so badly to believe in us. To prove everyone wrong. And now, it feels like I've lost myself. Her words came faster now, the floodgates open. Every time we fought, he'd brush it off like it wasn't a big deal. "Why do you always nag, Elena?" That's what he'd say. Like it was my fault. And maybe it was. Maybe I was too demanding, too controlling. I don't even know anymore. She paused, her shoulders trembling as she took a deep breath. I thought marriage would make him grow up, but it didn't. It just made me feel old, tired, like I was carrying both of us. And the worst part is, I don't even know if I married him because I loved him or because I was so desperate to escape my own mess of a family. Elena's voice grew softer, almost a whisper. I keep thinking, maybe if I'd waited. Maybe if we'd taken more time to figure things out. But now, it's too late, isn't it? We're married. We made vows. I can't just walk away. She slumped back in the chair, as though the weight of her own story had finally exhausted her. I let a moment of silence settle between us, giving her room to breathe. This is where stories like Elena's begin to challenge us. What would you have done in her shoes? Would you have believed love was enough, or would you have waited to make sure the foundation was strong? Feel free to share your thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Elena's journey is far from over, and in the coming chapters, we'll explore the choices she faces and the lessons she begins to uncover. Let me know what you think so far, every perspective matters. Elena sat quietly for a moment, her gaze distant. Then, as though pulling from a memory she'd been avoiding, she began again. The first few months, they felt like a dream. I don't know if it was because everything was so new or because I was determined to see only the good in him, but back then, I thought we were happy. I really did. Her lips curled into a faint, wistful smile, though her eyes betrayed the sadness beneath. We didn't have much. Our apartment was tiny, with mismatched furniture we'd picked up from thrift stores and hand-me-downs from friends. But we were young, and it felt romantic in a way, like we were building something together from scratch. We'd stay up late eating pizza on the floor, talking about all the places we'd travel to one day, all the things we'd achieve. Alex would make me laugh so hard I couldn't breathe. I thought, this is it. This is what love is supposed to feel like. Her smile faded, and she looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring absent-mindedly. But love isn't just laughter and late-night talks, is it? It's the unglamorous stuff, paying bills, making sacrifices, sticking it out when things get hard. And that's where we started to fall apart. Neither of us knew how to handle it when the fairy tale ended. She paused, drawing in a shaky breath. It started small, little things that didn't seem important at first. He'd forget to pick me up after my shift, and I'd have to walk home in the dark. Or I'd ask him to help clean up after dinner, and he'd promise to do it later, but later never came. I told myself it didn't matter. I didn't want to be the nagging wife. But with every little thing, it was like a piece of me was breaking off, one by one. Her voice softened, and she leaned back, her arms wrapping around herself. There was this one night, it was supposed to be a big deal. I'd just gotten a small promotion at work. Nothing huge, but it meant a raise, and I was so excited to finally have some breathing room financially. I told Alex I wanted to celebrate. He promised he'd plan something, so I got dressed up, thinking we'd go out. But when I came home, he was on the couch in his sweats, playing that stupid game he loved. He didn't even remember. I just stood there, staring at him, and he looked up and said, "Oh. I thought you were working late tonight." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. I remember thinking, this can't be the same guy I married. The guy who used to surprise me with flowers, who made me feel like the center of his world. But maybe it was. Maybe I just didn't see him clearly before. Or maybe he didn't change at all. Maybe I was the one who changed. Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. I tried to talk to him that night. I told him how I felt, how I needed more from him, not just as a husband, but as a partner. He nodded and said he'd try harder, but nothing changed. It was like he thought saying the right words was enough, like the promises were the work itself. But promises don't clean the dishes. Promises don't pay the rent. Her voice cracked, and she pressed her fingers to her temples. I didn't know what to do. Every time I brought it up, he'd get defensive, or worse, he'd laugh it off like I was overreacting. And maybe I was. Maybe I expected too much. I thought we were supposed to grow together. Instead, it feels like we're stuck in place. Or worse, that I'm the only one moving forward, and he's dragging me back. She looked up then, her eyes meeting mine, filled with a quiet desperation. Do you think I was wrong to expect him to grow up? To take this seriously? Or was it naive to think love could turn us into the people we needed to be? I watched her carefully, knowing these were questions she didn't just want answers to, she needed to find them for herself. Elena's story reminds me of how easy it is to idealize love, to believe it can smooth over the cracks before we realize how deep they run. What do you think? Should love be enough, or does it always need something more, maturity, preparation, maybe even a bit of luck? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Elena's journey is far from over, and your perspective might just help her find the clarity she's looking for. Elena stared at the ceiling, her fingers nervously picking at the fabric of her sweater. I didn't think it could get worse. I mean, we were already barely holding it together. But then I found out about the loan. Her voice wavered, but she pushed forward, as if saying it aloud would finally release the grip it had on her. I came home one day, and there was this letter on the table, official looking, with a bold stamp across the top. I opened it, thinking it was just junk mail, and that's when I saw it. A notice about a personal loan. $15,000. My heart stopped. I couldn't even process the number at first. It just didn't make sense. She sat up straighter, the energy in her voice shifting to something sharper, angrier. I waited until Alex got home. I didn't even let him take his shoes off before I showed him the letter. He looked at it, shrugged, and said, "Oh, that. Yeah, I meant to tell you about that." Meant to tell me? Like he forgot or something. Like taking out a loan that big without even mentioning it was some minor detail he just didn't get around to. Her hands tightened into fists, resting on her lap. I asked him why he needed that much money and why he didn't come to me first. Do you know what he said? It was for us, babe. I thought I'd surprise you. Surprise me? With what? He wouldn't even tell me what he spent it on. He just kept saying it was for us, that I needed to trust him. But how could I trust him? How do you trust someone who hides something like that? Elena shook her head, her voice trembling with frustration. That was the night we had our worst fight. I told him he had no right to make a decision like that without me. He said I was overreacting, that I was acting like his mother, not his wife. And maybe that's how I felt, like I was scolding a teenager who didn't understand consequences. But he didn't understand. He didn't see how much damage he'd done, not just to our finances, but to us. Her eyes softened for a moment, and her voice dropped to a whisper. I think that's when I started to realize, we weren't a team. We weren't partners. It was like we were on opposite sides, pulling against each other instead of working together. And I couldn't see a way to fix it. She drew in a deep breath, as if trying to steady herself. I didn't leave that night, though I wanted to. I told myself I'd give him one more chance. I told him we needed to sit down and go through everything, every cent, every plan. I wanted to make it work. But even then, I think I knew. Deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, about respect. And once those are gone, what's left? The room fell silent as Elena's words settled. Stories like Elena's remind us that love, while beautiful, isn't always enough to hold things together when trust is broken. Have you ever been in a situation where trust was hard to rebuild? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Sometimes sharing can bring clarity, not just for others, but for ourselves too. Elena's gaze dropped to the floor, her voice quiet but steady. It all came to a head about a month later. We were still fighting about the loan. Well, I was. Alex had moved on like it never happened. Every time I brought it up, he'd shut me down, saying things like, "I already told you I'll handle it. Why do you keep bringing it up?" But he wasn't handling it. The payments were piling up, and I was the one getting calls from the bank. She rubbed her temples, as if the memory itself was physically exhausting. There was one night I couldn't take it anymore. I'd worked a double shift, and when I got home, the place was a disaster, again. Dishes in the sink, trash overflowing, his shoes in the middle of the floor like he just kicked them off and forgot they existed. He was in the bedroom, headphones on, yelling at his game like nothing else in the world mattered. I don't know what came over me, but I just snapped. I grabbed the controller out of his hands and threw it across the room. It shattered against the wall, and for the first time, he actually looked at me, really looked at me. I told him I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be the only one holding us together. I couldn't keep cleaning up his messes, both literal and figurative, while he acted like none of it mattered. I told him I felt like I was suffocating, like I didn't even recognize myself anymore. And do you know what he said? He didn't apologize, didn't ask how he could fix things. He just sat there and said, "If you're so unhappy, maybe you should leave." Her voice broke, and she blinked back tears, her jaw tightening as she fought to stay composed. I don't think he meant it. Not really. But the way he said it, so casually, like it wouldn't matter if I walked out that door, that was the moment I knew. I'd been fighting so hard to save us, to save this idea of what we could be, but he wasn't fighting for me. And if he couldn't fight for me, then what was I even fighting for? She paused, her hands trembling in her lap. I didn't leave that night. I wanted to, but I couldn't bring myself to. I just sat in the living room, staring at the wall, trying to figure out where everything went so wrong. How did we get here? How did I end up married to someone who felt like a stranger? Her voice softened, and she leaned back in her chair, the weight of her words pressing down on her. The next morning, I packed a bag. Just a small one, enough for a few days. I told him I needed space to think. He didn't try to stop me. He just shrugged and said, "Do what you need to do." That hurt more than anything he could have said or done. It was like I didn't matter to him anymore. Maybe I never did. Elena exhaled, her shoulders slumping as though the telling had drained her. Part of me hoped that leaving would be a wake-up call for him, that he'd realize what he was losing and fight to get me back. But he didn't call. He didn't come after me. It's been 2 weeks, and I haven't heard a word from him. Not one. She looked at me then, her eyes searching for answers. Did I do the right thing? Was leaving the only option? Or did I give up too soon? These are the questions that linger when a relationship falls apart, aren't they? Was there more to fight for, or was walking away the only choice? I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Elena's shoes? Maybe your insights could help her see things from a different perspective. Don't hesitate to share. Sometimes, a fresh perspective makes all the difference. Elena sat in silence for a long time, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, steadier. I've been staying with my sister these past 2 weeks. It's strange, she has her own chaos with 2 kids and a husband who's always working, but somehow it feels quieter than my own home ever did. I think that says something, doesn't it? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and clarity. Being away has given me time to think. At first, all I could do was replay every argument, every mistake, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just one thing. It was everything. It was who we were when we got married, 2 kids playing house, thinking love was enough to make it all work. Her lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. I wanted so badly for it to work, to prove that we could rise above all the warnings, all the doubts. But love can't do the dishes. It can't pay the bills. And it definitely can't grow someone up if they're not ready to grow. I thought marriage would force Alex to change, to become the man I needed him to be. But it doesn't work like that, does it? She leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant again. I think the hardest part is admitting my own role in this. I ignored the red flags, ignored my own doubts, because I wanted to believe in the fairy tale. And when reality didn't match, I blamed him for not being what I needed instead of admitting that maybe we were both wrong. We weren't ready. Neither of us was. Elena's voice grew firmer, like she was finding strength in her own words. I'm not saying it's all my fault. He made choices, bad ones, that hurt us both. But I chose to marry someone I knew, deep down, wasn't ready to be a husband. I chose to believe that love would fix everything. And maybe that was the real mistake. She sat quietly for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle. So where does that leave me now? I don't know. Part of me still hopes Alex will wake up, that he'll realize what he's losing and fight to change. But another part of me knows I can't wait for that. I have to move forward, with or without him. Elena looked at me then, her expression resolute. I'm not sure if our marriage can be saved. But I do know this, I won't lose myself again. If we have any chance of making it work, it has to start with both of us taking responsibility, with both of us wanting to grow. And if he's not willing to do that, then, maybe it's time to let go. As she spoke those last words, I could see the faintest glimmer of peace in her eyes. She was still grieving, still uncertain, but there was strength there too, a quiet determination to find her own path, no matter what. Elena's journey is a powerful reminder that relationships, especially marriages, require more than just love. They need communication, mutual growth, and shared responsibility. What do you think? Could Elena and Alex find a way back to each other, or is moving on the only choice left? I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you do in her shoes? Let's keep the conversation going.